All right, so let's get started and introduce Ronald L. Toone for Structuring Practice on Foundation of Leadership. Ronald L. Toone is a Los Angeles native and an architect who came to the profession by accident of high school counseling. He received his bachelor's of architecture at USC, studying under ecologist Ralph Knowles and case study architect Perry Coing, and his master's of architecture from the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied with gold medalist Louis Kahn and landscape architect Ian McHarg, having served as AIA Los Angeles president and on the AIA California board. He was elected to serve as the 1998 AIA national president. Working early in his career for A.C. Martin and Frank Gehry, among others, he founded L. Toone and Porter Architects in 1984, later renamed L2 Partners, and invested from the practice after 30 years, according to the exit plan he put in place on day one. He led his firm into global practice and competed effectively against large firms, securing numerous international commissions. He structured his practice on foundation of leadership, which he will share with you all today. All right, and now I'm going to hand it off to Ronald. Thanks so much for being here, everyone.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay. Let me just say, this is the first of 4 seminars. The first one is on structuring practice. The second one is on a subject you very rarely hear about in school, and it's 50 ways to lose your project, 50 ways to build it. The third one is taking your practice globally. It's global vision, local roots. And the final one is the ethics of architecture and the architecture of ethics. And all right, this is not advancing now. Jessica.
Do you want to click on, just try clicking on the screen one more time, and then there we go. Okay. There you go.
Okay, there we go. Thank you very much. All right, so this is today's lecture, seminar. Structuring careers on a foundation of leadership, firmness, commodity, and delight. And it's not switching. Okay. These are the learning objectives. If you like, you can screenshot this as well as a couple other things downstream. I won't go through this in detail because you have it here. Reference reading, you might want to screenshot this as well. Several books I've found very valuable to me over the years as I built my practice and moved into leadership in other organizations. The architect sees himself as the leader of a firm. They're trained to be holistic thinkers. We are weavers of consultant skills. All the design consultants and engineering consultants are kind of under the umbrella that the architect takes responsibility for. So there is an inbred understanding of a leadership position. But how often do architects venture out of their comfort zone and become leaders in the profession itself, in industries that they serve, on the academic side, within the community, in civil or cultural organizations, or even doing pro bono work? And I want to talk a bit about that today. But I've found that leaders tend to have a number of traits that are really important. They are unselfish. They are not self-serving. They serve others. It is a primary trait of leaders to serve other people first, to enable others to be the very best that they can be and to reach their achieved goals. They may not be the smartest person in the world, but they have the humility to understand who has the best idea and how to capture the value of that idea and share it with each other. They're open to suggestions, and by doing so, they earn people's respect. Most importantly, they feel an obligation to leave a legacy. It comes out of the Boy Scouts, I think. Leave your campsite better than the way you found it. But leaving a legacy behind, it creates a foundation to others to build upon. And then you plan for generational transition. So the people that are with you in the beginning and are with you all the way know that there's something they can pick up and carry going forward. Most firms, in my observation, were begun by great designers. You don't go to an architect because they're a great technical person or a manager. You go there for design. But that brings with it a kind of a blinding ego and disproportionately less refined technical skills, naive management skills sometimes. And sometimes there's very little understanding of operating the business. You don't go to business school, you go to architecture school, and it's a silo that keeps you distant from those kind of skill sets. There's an inarticulate marketing prowess. When I was in school, I was always taught, our class was taught that marketing was a shameful activity for an architect. But I found that the most effective architects were superb marketers. They just didn't want to admit it publicly. Their minimal legal and accounting experience training for architects, and human resources, goodness, mostly ignorant on that. So Warren Bennis talked about 3 irreducible qualities of leadership. The first was a leader must possess the ability to define a vision. No one follows people without a vision. The idea has to be something that you can latch onto. They must be able to inspire others to embrace that vision. Communication becomes very important here. Selling your idea to those that need convincing is really an important attribute. A leader must possess a willingness to assume risk. This is the most important thing. Without that, you can be a great manager, but you will never be a leader. You'll never be someone to follow unless you're willing to take the risk. In military terms, it's going over the hill first, not sending your troops over the hill. So it's really important to know when to take risk. John Maxwell writes about many qualities of leadership in his book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. These are not the laws, but these are characteristics, and they're alphabetized here. They're not in any particular order. But when you look at them and think about yourself, do you have those qualities? Do you have charisma? Do you have courage? Do you have passion? Do you have vision? Do you live with servanthood? Do you have discipline? All these things become really important. And I think these attributes are worth taking the time to think about. Traditional firms over the years were either structured vertically or horizontally. A vertical firm had parallel studios. This is where everything was contained within those studios. Skidmore, Owings and Merrill for decades was structured this way, maybe still this decade this way. And within that studio, everything was there. Master planning, urban design and architecture, everything you see on the screen here, even technical services and engineering and construction administration. It was almost like parallel firms. And these were firms that were always headed by a design partner. And they were very effective. They turned out consistent quality work that reflected the vision of the senior partner in that studio. And the strengths were they exposed emerging professionals to all aspects of practice. They built a kind of team interdependency, and as such, they created a lot of internal mentoring and congeniality. They produced architects that had comprehensive skills, and they had quality control, and everything seemed very, very strong. But there were some weaknesses. That the studios seemed to be pitted against each other. Each studio wanted the best projects, the best clients, the best staff. They wanted the most awards. They wanted to share their own profits within themselves. They wanted the most recognition. It was the potential there for a lot of political infighting between studios, and the competencies that one studio had are not necessarily shared with the other studios. Horizontal organizations, and I worked in one of these at AC Martin Partners, they're organized by capabilities. They're probably not organized that way today, but when I was there, they were. So you had a project management department, a planning department, design department. They were all departments: construction administration, engineering. Everything was stacked with horizontal layers. And the strengths of that is it builds efficiency and profitability. It focuses each person on their primary capabilities and builds camaraderie within departments. One of the problems is that you could never work overtime. Everything was according to schedule. I was there 3.5 years. I think I maybe have spent 8 hours of overtime in 3.5 years. And I just, for me, I didn't feel I could learn enough on a 40-hour work week. But it does bring consistency to design and technical and management systems, and quality assurance is built in, as is efficiency. The weaknesses were that you were, as a young professional learning, you were placed into a silo. You were either doing construction documents, and that's all it seemed that you would ever do, or you were doing design, and that's where you would stay, or you were doing management, you were doing something. And it was difficult in my mind to qualify for the licensing exams because you never got the full picture. And then there are firms that I call cluster firms. I've worked in another one, and it was essentially one studio. It was in a way a bit like SOM, but everything happened by really smart people that were hired by a really creative guy. And anything that had to happen, you just figured out how to make it happen. So you look at everything there and ask yourself, how many times you've been involved in tax or in banking or in leasehold, or in profitability of your company or public relations. When I worked in that particular firm, they had never been published as architects. They'd been published for furniture. And I got them published for the first time because I had gone back east when I was with Martin to try and get them published, and I did. And I met the editors and who never had the budget to come west. And because of that, I was able to do that. Without that, that doesn't happen in a firm like this. The strength of something like that is you're working with a national or global acknowledged star architect. You're working on cutting edge projects. You're given responsibilities beyond your capabilities, trusted that you're intelligent enough to figure it out. And there's something really remarkable about that. It's a confidence builder. It's also a career resume builder. There are some weaknesses as well. And there always seems to be an obsession of designing beyond expectations. There's a heavy focus on design at all costs. There's constant pressure to do better and different than the time before. And very often the need to associate with an architect of record, one that really knows how to keep water out of buildings, one that really knows how to comply with building codes, one that really knows how to meet a budget. There's less emphasis on management and less emphasis on documentation. On that particular firm, that all changed. But on many firms, it doesn't. So when you're structuring your firm, I think I'll share with you, this is a case study, let's just say, applying the best practices for both the vertical and horizontal structures. It requires subordinating your ego to your professional sense of reason. When I started my firm in 1984, it came out of an acquisition of another firm that didn't work out. And when I started it, I selected 2 other people to start the firm with me. And I wanted to have the benefit of studio comprehensive learning, the benefit of the departmental quality assurance. And I didn't want to have to interact with an architect of record. I wanted to have us do everything from soup to nuts. So the firm was structured based on one partner having the last word authority on all management issues. Last word means last word. It doesn't mean a conversation. It means end of conversation. Last word authority on design and last word authority on technology. And so for me, I pulled something which I call the Vitruvian Molecule. Vitruvius in the 1st century wrote his 10 books on architecture. And he talked about firmness, commodity, and delight. And for Vitruvius, firmness was the foundation of a building, the strength of a building. The commodity was the arrangement of the elements, and beauty was the delight. So when I started Altoon and Porter in 1984, which became Altoon Partners, Firmness became for us two aspects: practice administration and practice management. Commodity became technical documents, permitting and bidding, and construction administration. And Delight became planning, urban design and architecture, and communications. So when you start a firm, the organizing principles and exit plans need to happen at the same time. You need to know on day one who you are yourself, what your capabilities are, and when and how you will leave. It's kind of hard to talk about leaving. If you're a young person starting a firm, you're maybe in your 30s and you're saying, okay, let's talk about retirement. But it's important to do that, because what you're doing is you're setting a framework upon which you will be attracting people to join you, stay with you, build with you, and ultimately maybe even inherit from you a firm. So shared leadership becomes earned ownership, becomes a legacy firm. And you recognize and celebrate complementary strengths as opposed to having competitive strengths. And you overcome individual weaknesses. If you're really strong in design, you're probably not as strong in technology or organizational skills. What I observed when I was in school and when I taught at UCLA and USC, I found that about a third of the students were really skilled in design, and two-thirds of them were not. But a third of them were also skilled on the technical side, and a third of them knew how to manage their time. That seems to stay with you a good part of your career. So instead of prioritizing what's more important and less important, how about prioritizing it's all important? So for us, Firmness, first aspect was practice administration. It's the business of the business. An MBA would be far better to do this job than any architect could ever be, because it has to do with your organizing structure and documents. It has to do with your leasehold. It has to do with the legal entity that you are. It has to do with accounting and taxation. And taxation can be quite complicated if the minute you move out of state. It has to do with the various insurances you need to have, your banking relationships, and the ability to stay viable even in tough times, and human resources. All of that can be handled by someone who is not an architect. Project management, however, is a professional interface between the client and the firm's staff. An architect, in my mind, is required. So that deals with the contracts that you're having with that client, the budgeting to do the project, scheduling the project, your project delivery organization, which be different for every project, selecting people and having manpower for that project, the resources that you'll bring to it, whether they're digital resources or other things, and the profitability. On the commodity side, that breaks into a couple pieces too. And that would be technical services is the first one. And that's design development, during design development and construction documents. So I would always ask for a code search during schematic design. The last thing you want to do is come up with a wonderful design that everyone, your client, the community, everyone loves, but you find out you can't build it because you haven't done a code search. Document framework and protocols, construction documents, the coordination of all engineering consultants, as you know, specifications, plan check reviews, building permits, and general contractor selection, which I like to bring aboard also during schematics, because I want the intelligence of the contractor at the table. Second aspect is construction administration. Let's go back to that other one for a second. If you have a contractor's voice at the table early in design, you are finding a way to filter out the objections the contractor is going to make during construction. If they haven't brought it up during design development, or construction documents, they have no right to bring it up during construction. So you get the benefit of their knowledge, their wisdom, their opinion to deal with and resolve during the process of design. Then anyway, you get into construction, and the request for information, job sites, visits, and reports, evaluating alternative materials and systems, payment requests, CFOs, closeout, and lender verifications are particularly important, because when the lender wants you to sign off that the building complies with everything, now you have a real lever to use as you're talking to the contractor about making sure the building is complying with what you have intended. On the delight side, the design services include all the normal expertise that you see there on the screen that architects do, including design narratives, including a way to describe to a client, to a client's tenants, to a community, to a review board, exactly what the intent is. Architects are noticeably generally not well trained as writers, but here's a great opportunity to train oneself into communicating the essence of an idea. Imagine if you're trying to sell an idea to an offshore client who doesn't speak English, and you need an interpreter, and you're dealing with in the realm of ideas, which in many cases is highly subjective and not objective. How do you communicate effectively to those that are now dealing in the realm of ideas? There's also outreach services, and that's representing the firm holistically. It's not only your branding and your materials and your website, which is always needs to be refreshed, but marketing. And how do you do marketing? Do you do it with writing books? Do you do it with newsletters? Do you do it with holiday cards? Do you do it only digitally? When you develop business, how do you go about doing that? And we'll come back to that and talk about that in a minute. Marketing and business development are very, very different. Marketing creates an awareness in the marketplace. Business development is stalking and bagging a particular client for a particular project. And public relations is then celebrating it, getting the word out. And that leads back in a circle back to marketing again. And then who is the voice of the firm? Who speaks for the firm, and where do they speak for the firm? Do they lecture at universities? Do they talk to AIA conventions and conferences? Do you want to spend your life as an architect only talking to architects? Or do you want to talk to the client world who may be your future clients? Do you want to get out and talk to the community who might embrace your ideas better? Do you spend the time to sit on boards of directors of any kinds of organizations? Do you take time away from your practice to become a resource to the greater community? Outreach services also includes, as I said, speaking at AIA and the industries that you serve. If you do hospitals, do you belong to hospital organizations and speak there? I did a lot of retail work. I spoke at a lot of retail. I can't tell you how many retail conferences I spoke at. I can't tell you how many projects I landed by doing that. Do you write op-eds and articles? Do you share your expertise? For me, it was always important to give it all away, to give it away to my competitors, because it meant that I had to be more creative and come up and stay fresh every time we would compete for a project. Do outreach by teaching and lecturing. So leadership activities beyond the practice are in those kind of roles that I identify here: profession, industry, education, community and civic, not-for-profits, and pro bonos. And we'll touch on that in a bit. So you structure your firm, and you structure it however you're going to do it, and you structure it with all those voices represented. But how do you then actually deploy it? What we did was inadvertently, we set up a matrix management system where we basically had one architect in 7 bodies. There were 6 originally, and you'll see the chart talks about 6, but we added a 7th partner when the computer became smarter than all of us, and we needed someone smarter than us that understood the computer. So we assigned last word responsibility and authority into each of these pools. We ceded decisions, as I said, to the others, and we were building strengths and overcoming weaknesses. We had a checks and balance system of collaboration, not competition, putting the client first. And it worked like this. Across the left side, you had those aspects I talked about. Firmness was business administration. That's the business of our business. Project management, design services and outreach, and technical services and construction. Those each represent a partner, a different person with last word authority over every one of those 6 elements. Across the top, there are 6 partners who are partners in charge of projects. They relate directly to the client, and they run a project all the way through each of those disciplines. So they find a project, and in here it has to meet all tax issues, banking issues, everything related to business administration. In here, it has to, that partner is assigning staff to this project, assuring that partner is assuring the mechanisms are there for profitability, scheduling, budgeting, and everything else. This partner is the one who's going to make the decisions. If this green partner over here's twin brother comes to the firm, that's this partner's brother, and says, I want you personally to design my project, it doesn't happen. This partner is in charge of designing that partner's twin brother's project. It was a system that was put in place to assure that there will be equal, identical oversight on every aspect of the practice for every project that came in, no matter who the client was, no matter who the partner in charge was. So everyone was getting the same standard of care for the legal tax aspects, for the management aspects, for the design aspects, for promotional aspects, for technical and construction over every single project. So the outcomes, we were founded in 1984. In 91, I had a 7-year itch, and I said, if we're not working internationally by this period, in 7 years from now, I'm out of here because I want to do that. And the firm took up the challenge. In 91, we had a staff of 32 professionals, including support people. We had a national reputation for retail-based mixed-use projects, but I was the only partner who had ever worked overseas on projects. And I had, at the time, 5 other partners. We had a passion for cultural immersion, and we were willing to delegate last word authority. So what happened? What happened was, in 30 years of practice, we designed projects in 46 countries. We basically had a 24-hour office in 3 time zones: Los Angeles, Amsterdam, and Shanghai. We built over 200 million square feet, probably closer to 250 million square feet. We had over $16 billion in construction value. And in those 30 years, we didn't have a single legal judgment against us. And I'll tell you, it's not because we were any smarter or better than anybody else. I'm convinced it was because we had a culture of interdependency and trust, and we defined ourselves as one architect in 6 bodies, which gave us the perspective vision of 12 eyes and then 14 when we added the next partner, as opposed to 2 eyes that would be by a person who starts a design firm and says, I am the all and the end all. We simply had the benefit of smarter minds and accepted there were smarter minds in their different areas of expertise. Weld Cox, who founded the Cox Group, which was the preeminent advisor to architects and engineering firms and so forth, made some early recommendations to us. He said, be very clear about your goals. Write them down, put them on the wall, know what they are. Focus on your desired outcomes. Don't waste your time with the other stuff. Know where you want to go and focus on getting there. He said, always reflect personal opinions. There's a tendency that everyone has to basically say, well, there are some who might say, or we say, forget that. Tell me what I say. Be courageous enough and say, I believe this. I disagree with you. I think this is better. Take ownership of your position and don't be Machiavellian with it. When Wilcox ultimately retired for reasons of health, he had been advising to firms around the world and had hundreds of firms in his client list. Wilcox decided to retain 3 firms to continue to work with until he died. And our firm was one of those. And I said, well, why did you accept us? He said, because you're a textbook case. He said, your firm exceeded every plausible expectation. You penetrated every geographic region. You competed effectively against the big firms, and you created a culture of collaboration and independency. And I want to study that and see how that plays out into the next generations. And I'll tell you a little story. We were approaching our 7th year, and I was having what I would call a 7-year itch in architectural terms. And I called Weld up and I said, Weld, I've written a letter of resignation from the firm, and I'm post-dating it 7 years. He says, why are you post-dating it 7 years? I said, well, I built this firm with my partners. I didn't build it alone. Collaboratively, we built this firm. So I'm in it with them. But Weld, I'm not happy. He said, why aren't you happy? I said, well, I'm glad you asked me that, Weld. I'm not happy because I'm not doing the kind of projects I want to be doing. I'm not doing them where I want to be doing them. I want to be working internationally. I want to be doing higher education. I want to be doing civic buildings. And most of our work is commercial work. And we're stars in that arena, but I'm missing out on the other things. He said, and so what do you propose to do? Why are you resigning in 7 years? I said, well, I built it up for 7 years. I think I owe it to my partners to be there for the downside of the hill as well. He said, don't send the memo. I'm coming out to California. So he flew out from Rhode Island and he met with all the partners. And he said to each of the partners, tell me about your firm. And to a man, every one of them said, I love the firm. I love my partners. I love our staff. I love our clients. I love the projects I'm working on. If I never worked on anything different the rest of my career, I'd die a happy architect. And he looked at me and says, what are you going to do? So I said, I'm handing out my memo. So I handed it out and the shock hit. And they said, my God, what do you want to do? And I said, that's what I want to do. And Weld said, here's the solution. He looked at me. He says, you pick 3 specific projects in 3 different areas that you want to get with 3 clients, actual projects you want to go after that represent those 3 areas that you want: education, public work, international project. If you're able to get those 3 projects, you'll be able to achieve here what you want to do by leaving here. But to do that, the firm's going to have to put everything at risk, and it's going to have to not market to its strength. If your partners are willing to do that for a year and you fail, the deal is you shut up and go back to your knitting. But if you succeed, you'll get there. So everybody accepted the challenge, and that's what we did. So we stayed together. We went international. You saw the results. On transitions, I got a lesson from the most improbable source. The only architect I worked for that was never known to be a designer. And he said to me, you may think you're in the design business, but never forget you're ultimately still in the people business. That advice has served me so well. I have reached across the aisle to clients. I have done everything I could do to understand what made them tick. And it was so important for me. When Weld passed away, his replacement was an engineer. He had strong objective experience, but he lacked what I would call subjective wisdom and insight. He focused on the quantitative rather than qualitative issues that defined our success. It's kind of like the difference between demographics and psychographics, which is objective and subjective thinking and behaving. So some parting thoughts from me on irreducible qualities of a partner. I carried around a card in my pocket. all the time. And on that card, these were written down. To become my partner, you had to behave with dignity. You had to have absolute integrity. Your ethics had to be beyond reproach. Your personal morality would be lethal in terms of the partnership if it wasn't there. Your veracity, truthfulness was essential. We had to have shared values. You needed to have wisdom and competency. You had to behave with grace, have whatever commitment it took to get the job done, be willing to sacrifice, and most of all, to have judgment. Without those, you can become a great long-term member of the firm, but you'll never be a partner. I was very fortunate to have some very terrific partners. Mahatma Gandhi talked about 7 sins. They were wealth without work, knowledge without character, pleasure without conscience, science without humanity, worship without sacrifice, and politics without principle. Really important to dwell on that a little bit. It's really important because architects are entrusted with so much, and I think we really need to behave in a way worthy of that trust. Max Dupree was a great writer. Max Dupree was the chairman of Herman Miller, and I read his books on leadership, invited him to speak to the AIA Los Angeles chapter once on leadership, which he did. He talked about leadership, and leaders listen. The great tribal storytellers, they can always tell a story. Really good diplomats. They'll tell you why, not how. They'll lead through serving. They liberate rather than control and share power. They see the broader picture beyond personal expertise, and they're humble. They create a bond on interdependence. They improve places where they lead. We talked about the Boy Scouts. This is all about leadership. They show respect to those who lead and hire and train their own replacements, share recognition, give it all away, have passion, provide joy, and leave a legacy. The one picture on the screen, which is not a project of mine, is this one at the Gamble House, because it's a place where I lived. And it's a place where I tried to share leadership. And I talked about being a leader outside your practice. For me, and I think for any of you that want to optimize your opportunities, you need to find a place in the profession. I chose the LA chapter originally, and then California Council of AIA, and then the AIA. And after I served as president, I was brought onto the Architectural Foundation Board, and then the International Union of Architects for 6 years, where I was on their board. And I wrote what they never had before, which were the rules of the board and the rules of the General Assembly. So we changed it from what was a kind of the governance in a banana republic into a parliamentary procedure. In industry, I served the Urban Land Institute in LA in many roles, and as chair. I worked on volunteer time on technical advisory panels, which are like AI RUDATs, worked at ULI nationally and internationally, and the International Council of Shopping Centers, where I served as the first and only practicing architect serve on its board of trustees. I served on Woodbury's board of trustees at USC in multiple positions, and taught at UCLA and 10 NAB accreditation boards. I've served my church, disaster assistance overseas in a huge earthquake years ago. The Gamble House is shown here because, having lived there, I then came back and founded the Friends of the Gamble House as a way to secure that residence permanently. And I serve in the GSA as a peer professional and many pro bono things. Just opportunities that you can think about in terms of honing your leadership skills. Max Dupree, who I said was chairman and CEO of Herman Miller, wrote that to create buildings that inspire certain qualities and expression of a civilization, it's their civilization to express, not yours. When you go home and you return from working overseas, people are stuck with the building you gave them. And while one likes to build one's own portfolio, it seems to me that the contextual aspects that define that culture different from ours need a very profound voice. It's important to produce buildings that inspire people to do their best work. Buildings should evoke joy. And I remember visiting a psychiatric hospital outside of New York that very prominent architect had designed. And I went out there to see the building, and there was no one in it but a guard and a receptionist. And I said, "Where is everybody?" And they said, "You know, this building seemed to be so much like a prison that a number of people committed suicide here, and they've shut the building down." And the building was like 2 years old. Provide buildings that create an environment that encourage open community. They need to be welcoming and receptive and engaging and allow voices of all people to be heard. Another way to share leadership is to share the experience that you've had. For me, it had to do with writing books. I did 7 books. I've done an 8th, which is awaiting publication now. But the first one I was asked to do by an organization because I had spoken to a number of its world congresses. And that's the first one, International Shopping Center Architecture, because I wanted those buildings to become architecture and not built bubble diagrams. And I wanted to talk about the various elements in those buildings. There are a couple books there that are on the work of the firm, but mostly these have to do with lessons learned and shared with other people. So the first one on the left was not about our work. It was about a subject. This one was. It's the only book we paid for. This one was, I was asked to do the book on our work, but it was paid for by the publisher. This one on our, by then, transit and higher ed and other kinds of work. This one on repositioning properties that were underperforming, and this one on transit-oriented development and mixed-use projects. Jonas Salk served on the AIA Board of Directors in the year that I was there, and in his final meeting, he was asked to make a few comments, and he was very quiet through all the meetings. And in this final meeting, he got up and he said, "Let us all strive in everything we do to be good ancestors to our grandchildren." So at this point, a final thought from Max Dupree. Leadership is much more an art, a belief, a condition of the heart than a set of things to do. The visible signs of leadership are expressed ultimately in its practice. I think it's a very humanistic approach. And Max Dupree was an extraordinary man. When I invited him to come to LA to speak, his secretary said, "You know, he charges a significant fee and he travels first or business class and he stays in the best hotels." I said, "Can I talk to him?" And I talked to him for a little while, and I said, "My profession very rarely reaches beyond its studio to become leaders outside. I think we have an obligation to do that. And I just wonder if you could help us." And he said, "No fee, no charges. I'll come for free and I'll speak to you." And he did. So I'll pause here. And if there are questions, I'd be happy to take questions.
Thanks so much, Ronald. As I expected, we already have a couple questions. And so I'd really like to get right to everyone else's questions. And if you, it's really nice in this portion, and we'll stop your share, Ronald. We'll stop your screen share. And
Okay.
there we go.
There we go.
I'm realizing there's sunlight coming out of my face now. It's a shadow, but sorry about that. But if you turn your camera on, we can have you ask your question directly to the group. And I'm just going to go in order here. So Marjan Pearsons, do you want to ask your question directly?
Love to. Hi, Ron. How are you?
Good, Marjan. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm good to see you too.
I'm
So
glad you
my
wore your
question,
red glasses.
of course, I had to do something like you. So my question is, with such a wonderful career, and of course you and I have known each other for most of it. If you were what would you do differently? What are two things that you would have done differently? Number one, and what advice would you give to your 35-year-old self?
What would I do differently? I have been so blessed. It's so benefited by associating with wonderful people and having some great clients. Golly, I think I don't know what I would have done differently. I probably would have stayed longer. I mean, I set the firm up as an up and out firm, and we had an age where you had to start divesting. And when my older partner hit that age, he came in and asked for 5 more years, and we extended everybody 5 more years. And I really have enjoyed every bit of it. Would I have done everything differently? I don't know that I would have. I don't regret where I've been and what I've done and who I've associated with. It's been such a full and wonderful life. I'm good with it, actually. And the second part of your question was, advice if I was 35 years old. Yeah. Gosh. I think I would have taken some coursework in business school. It took me a while to figure out how to get inside my clients' heads. The thing is that architects are trained in a different dialect of the same language than their clients are. And we often talk past each other. And because that, we waste a lot of time and a lot of fee trying to figure out what's in their head, because we don't speak the same language. We don't even understand the same terms of art. It's why I started Altoon Strategic after I left my firm, because you come in an architect and you use terms like the terms that business people will use to describe their investment, the return on the internal return on investment in this is, and architects don't know internal, external, what that is. But it means a lot to a client, and then clients don't understand what it is to celebrate a space. What am I supposed to go and clap in the space? And architects work a lot in poetics and wonderful words, and thank God we do. But it's over the head of clients. So I think I would have found a way to learn that foreign language of client speak.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next we have a question from John Cruikshank. Do you want to ask your question directly, or I can read it out loud?
No, I'll ask it directly. Hi, Ron. John Cruikshank. I kind of snuck into this party. I'm actually a civil engineer, and I started my company, JMC Squared, 25 years ago. And in your talk today, I learned quite a bit. So thank you for that. A couple of things you said that I'm very interested in. The first one is about this card you have about your partners and the qualities of their partners. Obviously, that's one thing, and it keeps it fresh in your mind, and you can look at it. But how long did it typically take you to really know that they were partner material for you and that you'd make that offer to them? And was that a lengthy process, or what was the process?
I started the firm with 2 other people as partners. 2 other people that had competencies that I highly regarded that were nothing like my own, so that they completed me and I completed them. So I started the firm accepting the idea that you had to trust that aspect of your well-being to someone else. And because of doing that, we always looked for our replacement. So as young people came to work for us, we would talk all the time about, this one could be a future partner. We need to put this person in a spot where they can grow and learn things that they don't understand right now, and have them stretch and reach. And they're going to say, I can't do that. And you say, you can do it. Just go out there and do it. I have every confidence you can do it. And what we did was we added 5-year partners. So we started with 3. 5 years later, we added 2 more. 5 years later, we added 2 more. 5 years later, boom, boom. Every 5 years, we were adding partners. So we had a succession plan that we weren't just talking about. We were building. We were putting these people in place. We were putting them in leadership positions. We were giving them the opportunity to treat the firm like it was their firm that they started, that they were building. And all we required was that the Vitruvian Molecule be accepted and adhered to all the way through, and that they begin to train people as we were training them.
Thank you. And you answered my second part of my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Next, we have a question from Wendy. Wendy, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, yeah, thank you, Ronald. Thanks so much for, oh, can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Thanks so much for imparting this wisdom this morning. My question is, can you share some best practices in regard to firm partnership transition? For example, and this is a personal thing, my small business is merging currently with a larger one. The founding partners of a firm are retiring. Partners are coming in, and the new leadership be sensitive to existing culture and best practices while working to modernize and bring the firm into the future.
Mm-hmm. The transitions are always a challenge. We tried to set our firm up so that the transition didn't happen all at once, because we had 5 generations. Okay, and the first generation would go out within a couple of years of itself. The second generation would go out within a couple of years of itself, presumably, and the third and so forth. And you keep adding on to that. So it was never an abrupt thing. It was never anything like someone came and said, all right, lights are going out unless someone steps up and buys this firm. No, it was going to happen. And as it happened, it was quite natural. And actually, when Jim left the firm, when he fully divested, he was offered a position with the firm. So he would stay there, same office, same salary, same title, same responsibility, and so forth. And it would be like he was never leaving, but he would not have the authority and he would not have the vote. And ultimately didn't like that very much. So he decided to leave. When I reached the same spot, I decided that I would rather do it on a consulting basis and not be an employee of the firm, because I wanted to do other things. I wanted to start the enterprise that I did start, which is completely non-competitive with the firm, but working on the client side to encourage better interaction with architects. And so it's kind of worked its way through there. We've lost a few partners along the way that have left for personal reasons. And every time we did, we tried to fill in. I find acquisitions very, very sensitive and challenging. Each firm will have a culture. Each firm will have been successful entirely because of that culture. And when another culture buys another one, you never quite know how that's going to work. So some have worked exceptionally well, and others have had unexpected consequences. So be cautious, be optimistic, be open, and be tough.
Thank you.
Great question. Todd, I see that you're unmuted. Did you have a question?
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, okay. All right. So next, Julie Coleman, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, thanks for taking my question and giving it all away. I think we're really benefiting from all of that today. I wanted to go back to a slide that you had proposed, that you were describing regarding the 7 experts, basically the pillars of knowledge within your firm.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to see if there was a checks and balances between the 7 partners to increase the transparency throughout the project.
Well, each partner had last word authority over, let's call it their domain. The partners met every Monday morning, and we met for about 3 hours every Monday morning. And anything was on the table. There was nothing that was off limits. We talk about each other. We talk about the partnership. We talk about our clients. By the way, we created a grading system for clients. We created a system where we would grade a client on all sorts of things, what we knew about them, what we heard about them, our past experience with them, how long it took to get paid, if they ever stiffed us, I mean, anything. And if you didn't get a certain passing grade, we drop you as a client. We refer you to someone else. So we'd only work with, so we did that with ourselves too. We do performance reviews with ourselves, certainly with staff all the time. We would ask each other, and it's one thing that's really important among partners. I need to know, I'm married to you, you're my partner. I need to know what your 2-year goal is. I need to know what your 5-year goal is. I need to know what your 10-year goal is. I need to know when you intend to retire. I don't need to be bushwhacked. You know, I've given you this much. I need from you pure, open honesty. If you've got a problem, tell me the problem. If you need some help, how can I help? If I need help, will you help me?
Okay, that sounds great. So there was a commitment of a weekly protocol as to this is the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
And by the way, because we traveled so much, did a lot of work overseas, I was on the road a lot. And so being available for those sometimes was tough. So you try to call in when you were traveling, you try and catch up with people when you couldn't. Easier now than it was in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. But it's good that you showed the commitment to the partners.
Yeah. You know, I always say, you come into life naked, it's okay to go out naked. And so I'm saying, you know, you've got to throw yourself in.
Mm-hmm.
You're all in. If anybody's not all in, go be half in someplace else.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. So far we've gone through all the questions. I know one question that that is often really beneficial for a lot of those people here who are running, who are at bigger firms now, and maybe someone asked this question for them because they might be thinking about leaving. And what kind of advice can you give about that, and what kind of ultimately made you decide to go out on your own?
Yeah. I was in the process. I was asked to acquire a firm that I was with. The only firm that I joined that was not known to be a good design firm. I joined for a leadership opportunity and built it into a strong design firm. And I was there 8 years, but 6 years into it, I was offered the ability to acquire the Los Angeles office of that firm. And it was 120 people. It was too big for one person to acquire. And so I selected 5 other people to be partners and junior partners in that acquisition. And they represented those 6 areas. And we negotiated for the next year in good faith and had a document. And in the last year, we were running the firm. 2 of us were running the firm as co-managing partners. And we tripled the profitability of the firm in 1 year. And the owner, the primary owner of the firm, had been away on a pro bono service he was doing, and he was in the office maybe 6 days the entire year. And he came to us, he says, "Geez, how did you do that?" And we said, "Well, we simply watched what we were doing every day. We talked to people every day. We were hands-on every day." He said, "Okay, we're going to have to renegotiate the transition agreement because I've let it go too cheaply." I said, "No, you haven't. You get a percentage of the profits." He says, No. If I knew it could be this profitable, I could cut a better deal." So he was going to, and I said, "No, if you're going to renegotiate with me today, you're going to renegotiate tomorrow. We stick with the agreement we got, or I'm out of here." And he says, "No, we're going to renegotiate." So I walked out the door when my wife was 7.5 months pregnant. had to take time off her job and leave her job because of that. So I had no job. The firm took back my company car. I went out naked. Why did I do it? I did it because it was the only honorable and ethical thing to do. You couldn't stay and have a partnership with someone who did not have the same values. So I walked out cold. And you know what? The first day in practice, I landed a 960,000 square foot expansion to Fannie Mae's corporate headquarters in Washington, D.C., and started my practice. So there you go.
That's a great story. I'm surprised that you didn't bring that up in our other discussions. Thank you for sharing that. That's a lot. And I think, oftentimes we come to that point when all of a sudden there's kids and all these other responsibilities, and taking that leap, and then having positive results. That's really nice to hear. Julie has another question. Do you want to come back on, Julie?
Sure, thank you for doing this. I wanted, especially this year or in the last 2 years, essentially, how did you handle setbacks? You are very goal-minded, so it's you have the 2-year plan, you have the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan. Plans change, and there are internal factors within the firm or within your career, and also external factors such as the pandemic or whatnot. How did you handle those? And can you provide an example of that?
Yeah, what I'll tell you is that my firm was around long enough to have gone through a number of economic cycles. And we were founded in '84, and the first downturn happened as a recession that came rolling from Europe into the US, into Asia. And as the recession started rolling from Europe into the US, and we saw that happening, an opportunity came up to go after and look for some work in Asia. And what happened was a young lady that had been working for us for about 8 years, who has been from Indonesia, wanted to go home and see her family, and said, could I take a tray of slides home to show people what we've been doing? Mm-hmm. I said, fine. And a week later, she calls me up from Indonesia at home. I had an unlisted number. I don't know how she got my number. And she said, I've shown these pictures to some family friends. I've set up 5 interviews. Can you be here on Monday?
Yeah.
I said, no. She says, yes, you can. You can get on SQ001 and you'll land on this, and I'll pick you up at the airport. I said, no. I've got a week of meetings next week. Can you put it off a week? She says, yes, I can put them off a week. I said, okay. Well, in fact, I had no meetings that week, but I wasn't about to jump on a plane and get myself in trouble by going to a culture I knew nothing about. So I did everything. I called the World Bank. I called the AIA. I called the Department of Commerce Indonesia desk. I contacted the AIA International stuff. I contacted everyone, travel agent. I got shots and inoculations. I prepared myself on Indonesia as much as I could. And then I went over there and I came back with requests for proposals from 5 clients. And one of them went hard, and we started working over there. And what happened was, as the US closed down and people shrunk to about 1/3 their size, most architectural firms, we doubled in size. We went from 32 people to 64 people. During that recession, we had never done residential before. During that recession, we built it was a residential complex with like 2,800 units, and it was massive. It's probably the largest private sector project in the world at that time with that recession. Why? Because we saw something coming, and because we took the bait and went and made something out of it. So, and this happened a couple times, so you just have to be on the alert, and you got to be willing to risk it.
Right.
All about risk. We went to Russia. We went to Russia, and we designed the first Western design building for democratic Russia in Moscow. How? It was impossible. Nothing's impossible. Just do it. I had a client, one of the most ruthless guys I ever had. He called me up, just said, just do it. It's the best advice I can give you.
Yeah. Sounds good. So lots of research and have the guts to do it.
You know, risk is all about risk, but it's about calculated risk. So if you are prepared, if you know what to look out for, then it's not that big a risk. It just looks like it. You want to tell your competitors it's risky.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. All right, so I think I have one last question, and it's how you talk about all these things that you did outside of your firm, and then also writing your books. Why is that important? And then also, how did you figure out to make time for all those things? Because people like you do get up at 6 a.m., 5 a.m., and you fit it in the morning. How did you squeeze all that in?
I couldn't begin to explain that. I just did it. I mean, it's one of those things. There was an opportunity. I did it. I never asked permission. I never asked any of my partners for permission on anything. I just did it. If anybody complained, then I would accept that complaint and we talk about it. But it seemed to work out. What I know. One other thing I wanted to share. I noticed at some point that, in fact, it was the year I was AI president. We put in place a requirement for continuing education as a condition of membership. And we did that because we knew the states were going to start doing that to maintain your license. There was a lot of pushback on it. But when we did that, I decided to get our firm listed as an AI CES provider. And we produced something like 46 courses. We taught everything we knew as partners to everyone in the practice that wanted to learn about it. Everything from marketing, business development, public relations, design, working with engineers, picking contractors, lead certificate. We required everyone become lead accredited in the firm. If you wanted to advance in leadership in the firm and so forth, you make the time by saying that there is no limit to the amount of time that you'll give short of losing your marriage. I probably averaged close to 70 hours a week for 40 years, and I just indulged myself as much as I could in that, because if I could be effective, I would be effective. And if I couldn't, I'd walk away.
Well, thanks for that, Ron, for all of us putting in 70 hours and seeing what you can accomplish. It's pretty amazing. I'm really excited for this series to continue through the spring. I think it's you're giving such a wealth of knowledge here, and really look forward to the next one. Ronald, any last parting words?
It's just to say it's not all perfect. The next talk, we'll talk about 50 ways to lose your projects. And just to let you know that I documented that because I realized there are a lot of wonderful renderings and models we had of projects we didn't build, and I wondered if it was our fault. And it's often not your fault, and you ought to be aware of the snakes in the grass and how to protect yourself. And so I'll be showing 50 projects that were lost and with the reasons, and then 50 that we built.